Sequels are really commonplace nowadays, aren't they? Most of the time we get a legacy sequel like 20 or 30 years after the original, then is expected to just continue in perpetuity forever. That or we have a cinematic universe situation, though that concept's kind of dying off. I guess what I find really interesting is until the 2000s, the majority of film history, sequels were tricky for people. I recently watched the fourth Magnificent Seven film and it was a giant mess, and you almost wonder how, after only 4 films, that franchise not only died off so hard, but also felt like so tired. Then you kind of remember the original was an unauthorized remake of Seven Samurai, but a weird rapey polyamory movie about the Magnificent Seven going at it for the 4th time was really odd to me. I was thinking, how do you run out of steam after just 4 films? Then I remember most of film history, film sequels were treated like trash no one wanted, and as a result they were always trash that nobody wanted. Somehow, I'm going to segue this into RoboCop 3, which was a trash film that no one wanted. Orion Pictures planned to make 2 RoboCop sequels around the time the second film was released. Fred Decker, a workman with a few big credits across the decades, was pulled in to direct, this being his 3rd film after Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad. This being his final film until a quarter-century later when he'd work on The Predator with Shane Black. Frank Miller, the famous comic book writer and artist returning from RoboCop 2, came in to write, still working on breaking into films after pretty much achieving the height he could in the comics world, with seminal runs on Batman and Daredevil. Though like most comic writers and artists trying to jump into the film world, the transition was hard, and this would be his last appearance in Hollywood until Sin City, 12 years later. Frank's screenplay was allegedly brutalized during production and would later be made into a comic called RoboCop: The Last Stand, decades later, from the comic book publisher Boom Studios. Peter Weller announced he wouldn't return for the role of RoboCop, opting instead to join the film Naked Lunch, a totally forgotten sci-fi film by famous sci-fi filmmaker David Cronenberg, which reviewed well enough but was a complete flop, making $2 million on a budget of $17 million. Weller, looking to expand his horizons, led to the hunt for a new RoboCop to fill in the RoboCop costume. I was going to say boots, but I suppose there's a hell of a lot more than just boots on this guy. In his place was Robert John Burke, who would fill the RoboCop costume in his place, an experience he described as painful. The suit was built during production of the second RoboCop film, thus it was made for Peter Weller and not Robert Burke. Despite the first 2 films being hard R-rated, dark action satire films, Orion knew RoboCop appealed to kids more than adults, at least from a wide franchise perspective, what with his marketable robot human superhero man hybrid thing. RoboCop had video games, cartoons, and toys, with kids in mind for all of those products. So with that, Orion decided to do perhaps the most controversial thing they could possibly do, which was make the film less controversial, adding a kid sidekick, removing the blood and gore, chilling a bit on the satire, and making the film PG-13 rather than its hard R forebears. I can see in a way why this decision was made, but at the same time, the obvious miscalculation was that these movies were popular because they were R-rated, which created an environment that made the films fairly unique. Add to that the fact that RoboCop dropped 6 years earlier, thus much of its core fans, who were 12-year-old boys when the original film came out, were now 18-year-old boys and didn't want the films dumbed down. New fans that were younger, wanting to buy or rent the old films on video, now had the problem that they were introduced to a PG-13 action film. Now suddenly, they're watching an R-rated gore fest when they move back to the first 2. Things like the RoboCop cartoon had come and gone, and even so, that was explicitly made for kids, and as such, the expectation was that it had a children's vibe in mind. Also, RoboCop 3, cutting the edges off, kind of cut the heart out of the original satire, which was brutal, weird, but kind of had a point. Though let's be honest, the corporate folks making these calls probably could give a shit less if the satire is cut out. They just wanted to make a marketable movie. The film starts on the OCP finally achieving their goal of taking over Detroit with a private police department and total control over the city. Though in doing this, OCP was struggling, being purchased by the Japanese company, the Kanemitsu Corporation. Anyhow, the OCP is forcing people out of their homes to gentrify the hoods, using Hitler's Gestapo-like tactics to kick everybody out. This leads to a child of an ambiguous gender, Nico Halloran, to be separated from his or her parents. RoboCop and Ann Lewis try helping, but Ann is killed by the new villain, McDaggett. She didn't want to be in this film, I guess. As RoboCop goes undercover with the help of super hacking child Nico, RoboCop is damaged and asks for help from the OCP scientist Marie Lazarus, who is tired of the OCP's bullshit, what with their gentrification and sexism and whatever else. She helps RoboCop by making him a jetpack and fixing him up, so RoboCop confronts McDaggett, who makes it off, but interrogates a Resistance member who tells him where the Resistance base is, with him dispatching the Japanese robots of the Kanemitsu Corporation, which were naturally ninjas since, Japan. Most of the Resistance is killed and Dr. Lazarus is kidnapped. RoboCop is attacked by a ninja robot and is nearly destroyed, as always, but Nico hacks a broadcast since she's a cool hacker kid and reveals that the OCP is behind the old Detroit genocides, which leads to the company's collapse as its stocks plummet. The OCP mercenaries and the police go to war, with the cops, I guess, just learning what happens as RoboCop pulls up with a jetpack, killing all of the OCP's men. He heads to the OCP headquarters to bring in McDaggett, but McDaggett has a bomb planted in the headquarters, planning to kill RoboCop and the others, though of course they escape and McDaggett perishes in the blast. The CEO of the OCP is fired by Mr. Kanemitsu, and that's basically the film. RoboCop is back, now a different man. Well, kind of. Robert John Burke took over, and he is a cop actor through and through. Like a solid portion of his work are cop show adjacent things, so I guess they just grabbed Cop Guy to take over as RoboCop, I guess. I get the thought process here, I suppose. They did shit makeup to make Robert look more like Peter Weller.
I don't have many friends.
Yeah, I think it would have been fine if they didn't try whatever this was. Anyhow, he's too human, so they apply a microchip that keeps his emotions away. One big arc in this film they wanted to make a thing is the idea of the death of Ann Lewis. Nancy Allen was probably just ready to be done with these films, would be my guess. We also have the death of a bunch of Resistance members and the death of Nico's parents. Let's see. RoboCop gets a jetpack and blows dudes up. It's very, very 1993. Undeniably jumps the shark a bit. He becomes Robo-Dad to Nico by the end since her parents are dead, so that's kind of RoboCop's arc here. Nico, the little computer child, is a tech wizard, and pretty quickly Nico joins a rebellion of a sort, following her being taken from her parents. Though eventually RoboCop realizes her parents are dead, which he learned from a data hack that he grabbed, and he comforts the girl, which is something human he did.
I'm glad your new heart works.
It is somewhat a sweet moment, but honestly the kid is kind of bad in this film. This kid is a little girl. I thought it was a little 90s boy for a while. The name is also pretty asexual, so I didn't realize for like half the film that this was supposed to be a girl, so there you go. Marie Lazarus is more or less the new Ann Lewis. She was an OCP employee, but disillusioned with the BS that happens when they take over old Detroit and make it Delta City. She ends up leaving, befriending and upgrading RoboCop's suit to have a jetpack, but in a broad sense kind of takes over that human connection for RoboCop. Paul McDaggett is the new villain in this film, and in the tradition of Clarence Bodicker and Kane, like Clarence and Kane, he is a stern, tough-as-nails villain. This one decides to take the angle of weird genocider man, though. McDaggett wants a fully non-robo police force. Somehow the OCP is now anti-robot, which makes no sense for a big business that does what the OCP does, but also he uses the ninja robots, so who knows? I guess that was kind of a whim of his. He is very, very redundant to Clarence Bodicker, in my opinion. They really didn't reinvent the wheel for him, despite the new context, which is kind of what they did with Kane in the second movie, so I'm not all that surprised they kind of just redid the same thing a third time. This film has a weird tone since in a way it's the same general idea as the old RoboCops. People get killed in mass gunfights, satire, the whole nine. The problem is Orion avoided the MPAA like it was the plague. This film stripped the personality and thesis of the series to make a mass-appealing generic PG-13 superhero schlock piece. The grit just isn't here. You can feel how this turned more into your run-of-the-mill 80s action adventure than the cutting-edge parody we saw before, with the comedy we do see being more slapsticky.
Everybody move! Everything in the register now! Do it!
Though occasionally the satire does shine through.
It can't be that bad. Honey, can you hear me? Are you there?
It is occasionally almost there in terms of being a parody. I don't know, it's just weird. The tone tries sometimes, but it just doesn't land. Some of the action isn't awful, if there is a silver lining, and it does have some kind of fun action tropes big budget 80s films had at the time, like car flips and shit, which honestly today I miss dearly. The final fight is possibly the least subtle shit of all time, but it's pretty epic watching the hobos and the cops fight the OCP army. It was pretty fun. I like this moment where they just put like a 3-minute Ren and Stimpy style cartoon in the film. The commercials and cutaways were otherwise not all that notable to me, though. Basil Palordius returned to do the music from the first film and opted out of the second film, and honestly, he did a pretty solid job. I feel it pulls some of Danny Elfman's stylings, probably in part with Danny Elfman's Batman film being a hit. In fact, this whole film feels very Batman 89 inspired, even tonally, but it fails to hit par with the whimsical setting and stuff that makes that Batman film so memorable, where this RoboCop film falls a bit flat. Burt Lovett edited this film, and he was a veteran editor by the time he tackled this, and like the music, it worked well enough. The shots were all there, and the film from a pacing perspective wasn't too bad. I found it fairly engaging, though. I think some stuff with Nico and her family could have been cut, but since the producers included her, you kind of needed to leave some stuff in there since she's technically important to the plot, like the hobo cop uprising against the OCP near the end of the film. Gary Kibbe did a pretty good job on the cinematography, definitely less stylish than the first couple films for sure. They do the old restoring of RoboCop shot, that first person POV, which seems like a must for these films, but while otherwise it's plain, it does a solid job and looks good. Add to that solid costumes and sets, and yeah, it looks good enough. I wish I had more to say, but I think this film assembled solid teams for the behind the scenes stuff.
Don't.
I'm not gonna lie, there's some good and funny moments in here. It's just another substantial step from RoboCop 2, which as I discussed was already a pretty substantial step down from the first. Following RoboCop 2, for some reason this franchise becomes a response to other franchises like the Ninja Turtles movies, where they just neutered it to work for all ages rather than being the bloodbath with humor the first two were, and that really strips this franchise of its identity, making it unique. Now it just kind of feels like a mockbuster of Batman or something. If I recall correctly, the remake of the first film has a similar problem, but despite that, perhaps in part because many films are just so slop these days, films like this, which were considered slop in their day, are still far less bad than the slop of today. Like, compared to Ant-Man 3, this is high art, and apparently people like that film, but I'm pretty sure they're just lying. I won't call this a masterpiece, definitely the worst of the trilogy, but I don't hate it the way many people do, and perhaps I was being a bit harsh in the intro even. Just a bit. Let's not go too crazy now. Well, this was it for the main RoboCop films. However, the legend would grow with numerous comics and video games. In 1994, we got a live-action RoboCop TV series, and while that was pretty short-lived, we got a second animated series that followed, Alpha Commandos, in 1998, which was also pretty short-lived, and after that, RoboCop Prime Directives, which was technically a 4-part TV miniseries, each part being a feature-length TV film. Finally, though, in 2014, we got the remake of the original film, which I will be reviewing next. I don't really want to go through that other stuff. I don't care enough. The film made $47 million on a budget of $22 million. Rotten Tomatoes gave this film a 9%, which, you know. Did I die on the wrong hill calling this not total dog shit? I don't know. Maybe. Whatever. I said what I said.